Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Iyun Shulchan Aruch. Today is Siman Mem Zayin, Berachas Torah. Many people's maybe favorite Siman, I guess, in Orach Berachas Torah. I mean, Torah is the center of Judaism. We find out though there's two main brachas over here that you say, according to most opinions. Some say there's actually three, but in Halacha Hey, it says Berachas Torah Asher Kishanim Savatanu Al Divrei Torah. Right, Lasok with Divrei Torah, not Al Divrei Torah. Hariv Na Aveshar Bacharbanu. Hariv Na. Right, in Sivav it says basically this continuation of the first bracha, and most poskim say it's even if it's Zoraisa, it's not as important. The Gemara says Asher Barchaban is Mu'ula of brachos. That's the most important of the brachos. That's definitely Zoraisa according to everybody. The question is the first bracha Zoraisa? Not some say it's Zoraisa, some say it's Derabanan. I'd like to suggest that there's two mitzvahs salim on the Torah, and with this we're going to explain a lot of different machlokasim the poskim have in Berachas Torah over here. This is my suggestion over here. Just the words of the bracha. Asher ki yishanim tzanu lasok b'direi Torah v'hariv na Hashem l'keinu tzirei saraska b'finu v'finam kol b'Yisrael v'nyanachnu tzenu tzem kol b'Yisrael klana yodei shemecha should know your name. V'lo mitzvah lishma and learn your Torah lishma. As I explained many times, limud Torah lishma does not mean just to learn l'shem Torah. No, it means to learn for the purpose of understanding and knowing what the Torah really wants you to do. Right, lasos, right, and to know what lasos is, the good that the Torah has to offer, to know what to be able to do to enjoy the Torah. I'll explain this more as we go through Shulchan Aruch and Shas and Mishnayos. List all my other shiurim. So those first bracha, or some say two brachas over here, Bahariv, continuation of the first bracha, talks about Yediyas of the Torah, Havanas the Torah, understanding the Torah, right? Limud lasos, that's the point of the Torah. And that bigger is Torah Shabbat Peh. Torah Shabbat Peh is the explanation of the Torah to tell you the fine details, how you do the Torah, how you enjoy the Torah. There's another part to the Torah, which is Asher Bachar Bana, which is definitely Doraisa, which is mandated. When do we say that bracha? Well, when you have Kriyas Torah also. Kriyas Torah, you say that bracha also. And that, right, most people during, Shabbos, you have to, Kriyas Torah is Midoraisa on Shabbos. The Gemara at the end of Megillah says that, right, every week you're supposed to read, you're supposed to be say the parsha of the week. They're masakin also. Ezra is masakin Monday and Thursday and Shabbos afternoon to read also, right, the first aliyah from that week's parsha. So that every week's parsha similarly is Doraisa. And the bracha Asher Bachar Banu, most people have no idea what's going on when you're reading Kriyas HaTorah. I mean, unless you read Rashi, I mean, some of the parshas are very hard to understand. You're not doing it on the understanding or the knowledge of the Torah. That's not what, right? You need knowledge and understanding in order to do the mitzvahs. Here, it's not about that. It's about the greatness of the Torah, the exaltedness of the Torah, the fact that the matana that we have as a Klal Yisrael to have God in the Torah. It's a question that without understanding it, Nasev and Nishma, right? Whatever, Nasev and Nishma, meaning just do the Torah, or just the fact that we have the Torah. Maimon Har Sinai was a great thing that we got the Torah. Just the Maimon itself, the Musar Sfarim talk about, is a great thing. The Maimon, the fact that we got the Torah, the exaltedness of the Torah, having the Torah, even if we don't know what it means or what it says, we have no idea, right? We have no idea what the Torah is. Just we know it's a great thing, and we know it's a great thing, and therefore Kriyas HaTorah is basically symbolic of that, and that's the highest, that's the most important thing, because without that foundation, that Torah is the most important thing in our lives. And how great the Torah is. If we don't know that how great the Torah is, then we're not going to go bother the Torah Shabbat Peh to try to understand the Torah, try to figure out the fine details of the Torah, to know that it actually is good, to prove to ourselves that it actually is good. First, you have to come with the realization that the Torah is an unbelievable thing. The Torah is on a very high level, even higher than most people can understand. It's godly wisdom, things that it's not like, other academics, other knowledge in the world. It's stuff that's a lot of stuff is beyond our grasp. It's just a holy thing, and that's the second bracha, and that's for sure Doraisa. So let's go back to some of the halachas they talk about. There's a halacha, there's a discussion whether you have to make a bracha, Berachas Torah, on thinking about Divrei Torah, hear her Divrei Torah. So it's a machlokas, right? The Mishnah Berurah says, really seemingly, the Shulchan Aruch says that here lav kedibur dami, here is not kedibur dami. You don't make a bracha, Berachas Torah, on here at Torah, but the Gra says that no, even though here lav kedibur dami, there's a mitzvah v'giza b'yom v'layla. So I suggest over here that v'giza b'yom v'layla is obviously to think about Divrei Torah, and when you think about it, right, the purpose of thinking about the Torah is to understand the Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, to deal with the Torah, to understand the Torah, to know liyodei shmecha, to know what the mitzvah is, to know what the Torah is, and that is a mitzvah. So the Gra technically is right in terms of the first bracha. That's what I like to suggest. In terms of the first bracha, which includes v'hariv no, that bracha la'asok b'divrei Torah you should say before thinking about divrei Torah, but you don't need to say the bracha asher bachar banu. That dafka goes in a dibur, which kriyas Torah, right? Here someone goes to kriyas Torah and on Shabbos wants to do kriyas Torah and they just think kriyas Torah. No, it doesn't work. You have to read it. And you have to read it from a sefer Torah. Yeah, there's a kriyas Torah. Kriyas Torah is signifying the significance specifically of Torah shebechtav, which is basically the whole idea behind Simchas Torah, right? We complete the cycle of the Torah. We celebrate, we dance at that time. It has to be a physical thing. It's, because it's the words, right? It's saying the words with our mouths, right? Enunciating the words. It has to be. So we dance at that time. So we use our bodies to dance. Shavuos is really emblematic of Torah Shabbal Peh. So we don't really have the same dancing like that. Some people dance, but it's not as prevalent to dance with the Sefer Torah at that point. You mostly learn with your Gemara. You stay up all night. You learn your Gemara, Torah Shabbal Peh. So that's really the culmination and the celebration of Torah Shabbal Peh, Shavuos, and so therefore, and that Torah Shabbal Peh is really about the knowledge of the Torah, which is the first bracha, and about understanding, because Shas is full of the details of the Torah that we have to know in order to do the mitzvos. I'll answer one other question. The last halacha in Yudalit, it says Nashim Mavarchos Birchas HaTorah. Women are obligated to make Birchas HaTorah. What's the reason? So the Ber Halacha brings two opinions. One opinion is no, that the women have to know the halachas, so they have to make Birchas HaTorah because they're obligated to know the halachas. And the other opinion, the Gra says no, that really it's like a mitzvah seishas man grama, limud Torah, because like Pirkei Avos says, it's supposed to kovei itim l'Torah. The Gemara in Shabbos also says supposed to kovei itim l'Torah. So it's a mitzvah seishas man grama. You're supposed to do it at certain times, at least every day, once a day, or maybe twice a day. You're supposed to do learning a Torah. So it's a mitzvah seishas man grama. But just like women can make a bracha on shofar, on lulav, they can make a bracha also on limud Torah. So therefore, the nafkamina being could be motzi a man, according to the Gra. You can't be motzi a man. I'd like to say over here that, again, we'll split the brachas, that when it comes to the mitzvah of Yediyas Torah, like he says, you have to know the halachas. Women also have to know the halachas. So the first bracha, right, la'asok b'divrei Torah, which also means, like we talk about tefillin, mechesh b'nefesh, have to be osek in the Torah and think about the Torah and know the Torah, that women are obligated in it. When it comes to the bracha asher b'char banu, right, a woman can't get aliyah on the Torah on Shabbos. She can't read in the Torah. The Gemara is in Megillah because of kavod Torah, but she can't get aliyah, that's for sure. For sure, a woman can't get aliyah. She's not Yisrael. A woman, there's no kedushas Yisrael or kedushas Kohen. There's no kohenis. She's not kedushas kahuna. She doesn't have kedushas Levi, kedushas Yisrael. Only a man does these things. Only a man is obligated in kriyas Torah, which is the exaltness of the Torah, because that is the point of kovei itim l'Torah, right? It says in Shabbos, kavata itim l'Torah. The purpose of kovei itim l'Torah doesn't mean that you should only be learning kovei itim l'Torah. Some people learn the whole day. It's kovei itim l'Torah is that every person has an obligation to set aside time for Torah, not to understand the Torah. If you want to, you should set aside other time to learn the halachas, to know what to do, to ask a rav to know what to do. But kovei itim l'Torah, which is basically transformed today into daf yomi, right? Listening to a daf yomi share. Most of the people who go to the daf yomi share are left at the end of the day clueless. They don't know what's going on in the daf yomi share. But that's not important. It's important that they came and they spent an hour of their day, and if it with me, a half an hour a day, or 20 minutes of your day, learning Torah, and you give importance to the Torah, you show the significance of the Torah, and that is something which applies uniquely to men and not to women. And therefore, when it comes to the second bracha, if the woman want to make a bracha on the second bracha, they want to say Sher Bachar Banu, that they could only say Midin Mitzvah Shas Man Grama, right, which apply to men. They can't be motzi men because they're really not obligated in that mitzvah. And showing the significance of the Torah, that is up to the man, because he's the man. The man is supposed to be the head of the household. He's supposed to be the leader. He's supposed to show everyone the significance of the Torah. The women are also obligated to know the Torah, but that's only the first bracha of the Torah. That would be basically, figuring out the two different mitzvahs limud Torah, which the Graz and other achronim talk about, the two different aspects of the Torah, which is basically encapsulated in Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh. We'll talk more about this in different shiurim, but that's basically a synopsis of the two mitzvahs of limud Torah, And I think I gave you a pretty clear understanding of what they are. I hope you enjoyed. See you tomorrow.